Hi everybody, so we are going to talk about using basic Python basics here for, we're going to look at types, variables, input and output. So to do that, we need to start up Python, and we've installed Python a couple of different ways here. Actually, there's one installation of Python, but we can get at it a couple of different ways. And once you've installed our Anaconda, you should have an Anaconda PowerShell prompt. So select that. And then once you're in this, type idle, IDLE, to bring up the little idle IDE that's included with Python. Now, you're in a Python interpreter for 3.7.4 right here. So what that means is that you can go ahead and type Python commands. So for example, I can say print hello, and it prints back, it runs that line of code and gives me the result back. So we can certainly do it this way. I do want to introduce you to actually writing a program in Python, however. So what we're going to do under the file option is select new file, and you'll notice it says it's untitled. And so I'm going to do the same thing over here. So the program really is just a series of commands that the interpreter will run all at once. So if I select run module, or F5, it says it has to save this, so I'm going to go ahead and have it save. And you need to keep track of where things are as you're saving them so that you can find them again. I'm going to come over here and put this in my Python folder. And I'm going to call this lesson 1, types and variables. And I'll hit save on that. So that actually saved on my hard drive out here as a Python file. Actually, all a Python file is a text file with a .py extension. So if I navigate over here to where I saved this, you'll see that there is the file that we're talking about. And that's now this file. Alright, so let's talk about types and variables in Python. So I'm assuming you've got some programming knowledge, but I'll cover variables and types quickly. Basically, remember that a variable is just a place in memory that is labeled with a name that you can store values in, and that space in memory has different sizes depending on the type of the variable. So, for example, here's kind of an example of what we mean by types. If a number has decimal places, or it has a decimal in it, we would consider that to be a floating point number, or also in Python called a float. If a number did not have a decimal place, we would consider that an integer. And integers basically are negative and positive, as are floating point numbers. And then we have just regular strings or text. So those are the three main types that we'll be working with. There's also a Boolean type, but unlike other languages where there's different types of integers and different types of floating point values, we really just have these four main types: text or string, integers, floating point, Boolean. That's it. So to declare a variable, Python's considered to be dynamically typed. So what that means is if I just say x equals 9, the Python interpreter says, okay, 9 is an integer, and you're assigning that to a variable called x, so therefore x must be an integer. And so it figures out the type dynamically is the point. And we can say y is equal to sorry, I shouldn't say equal to, I should say y gets assigned. And let's have z be some text. Then we can print out each of these. So we'll print. Now if I say print x, what that's really saying is print the value that's stored at x. Same with print y. We're not really saying print the letter y, we're saying print the value that's stored at the variable y. And then print z, print the value that's stored in z. So now we can go ahead and tell this to run. So you should be able to tell me what it's going to be output on this. There's 4 lines of output, the hello, and then these 3. And so we'll go ahead and run this. And over here you see the results of the run. And sure enough, it printed out those different values just fine. All right, let's talk a little bit about string concatenation. So if we have text like the value of x is, we can append to the end of the text another string of text. So it's not really adding the two together, it's concatenating. It's taking the first string value and at the end of the next, and then tacking on the end whatever comes next, and you can just keep having additional concatenations here. So let's run this. You can see what it does. So there you can see that the value of x is, and this is appended. What if we wanted to say the value of x is, and then actually print out the value? Let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Okay, so it comes back and it gives us an error. And it says you can only concatenate strings, not int to string. So it knows that x is an int, and so here's the problem. When it sees this, it says, well, I can add integers together, or I can concatenate strings, but I don't know what to do if you give me a string and try to concatenate an integer, a different type. So what that's going to require is that we actually cast or convert x to be a string, because we can concatenate 2 strings together. So this is how we actually can do this. Now remember that we didn't have to do this when we were just trying to print out x itself. So now you can see that we get our nice prompt here, our nice output. And then we can go through and do this on each of the others. And what you'll see here, let's change this to y and this to z. And if we run, you can probably imagine we're going to get an error again. Errors are just fine, that's how we learn, so don't feel scared to do that. But again, it says I can't concatenate a string with a float. So again, we will convert by just simply saying the type and then putting the value inside the parentheses. And now it all prints out. You'll notice we didn't have to do that on z because z is a string. Okay. Now the other thing to note is in Python you actually don't have to print. You can just put the variable name by itself, and it assumes that what that means is you want to display the value of the variable. So, and that's in the interpreter, not when we write code like this. So if over here I said x equals 9, and then I just said x, it comes back and says 9. That's what the value is. All right, let's do a little bit of math or some calculations. So let's just take 3 integers. Let's say a is equal to 8, b is equal to 7, and c and we'll just say C is equal to A plus B. So because these are all numbers, it doesn't try to concatenate them together like strings. It's actually going to perform a mathematical operation. So in this case, it's doing a string concatenation. Here we're actually adding the numbers together. So it's going to add the value of A plus the value of B and assign it to C. And then we can just go ahead and I'll just copy this. And we'll change this to be C. So the value of C is, and then we'll run that. Okay, and I missed a parenthesis, so I got a syntax error there. Again, don't worry about making mistakes. So the value of C is 15, and then sure enough 8 and 7 added together is 15. Alright, now let's say A is equal to input so let's do something a little bit different. We're going to actually prompt the user for the values instead of setting them. So we'll say A and B. And let's take all of this code out and let's leave this in. Alright, so let's look at this code. I'll delete all this to get it out of the way. So the way we get input from the user is simply using the input function. So this will take the user input and assign it to A. Now, let's see what happens when we do this. Let's just print out C. So let's run this and see what we get. Okay. So if I type in 2 and 4, now it comes back and says 2, 4. Now the reason for that is because it's treating the input as strings. So if you don't want it to be a string, you've got to convert it, just like we did, to be whatever you want. So in this case, we're going to say int and int. Because what it did was it read A and B both as strings, so now A and B are string types instead of numeric. And then when it went to do the addition, it's not addition, it's concatenation, and it just appended 2. It just appended 4 to 2 is all it did. So let's go ahead and run this. So let's do 4 and 2 again. Now we get 6 back out. And the reason is because we've converted or cast what the user typed into an integer and then assigned it to A. Now the problem with this is what happens if we put in non-numeric values. For example, if I put in just text, it throws an error, and the reason it throws an error is because it can't convert that to a number. All right. Now, what if we wanted to do multiplication? That would be the asterisk. So we can go ahead and run this. So this will just multiply the two numbers together. And there's our answer. And then division, well, we do subtraction, minus. Let's run that. Four minus 5 is a -1, and then finally we'll do division. Now remember, because the types are being assigned dynamically, if I put 34 and 3, you'll notice that the result is a floating point number. And the reason it's floating point is because the result of this operation is floating point. Therefore, C is floating point. So that's what we get down here. And if we do, let's do 4 and then 2, you'll notice it's still floating point. It just assumes that it's going to do floating point division for accuracy. All right, so that's some basics about how to do input and output in Python, doing some conversions. Oh, let me share one additional thing with you, and that is this type function. If you ever wonder what the type of something is, you can use the type function, type, and then inside the parentheses, and I'll put all of that in a print statement, and we'll go ahead and run that. So 4 and a 3, and it says it's a float, and that's right, that's what C is. If I change that to A, it'd come back and say int. That's an int. Okay? All right, so that's some basics about input, output, and calculation and storage. We've covered those four things. We will have another video on logic or if statements, and then one on loops. And then we'll do one on functions, and then that'll give us kind of the basics of Python that we can then start doing some of our machine learning projects with. Now, just an additional note, there are other tools you can use to do Python coding in. And I'll share some of that with you in upcoming videos. And there's some tools from IntelliJ. There's something out there called PyTorch. There's also Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So we'll occasionally do videos on these other tools to help you out, because idle's fine for doing a little bit of learning like this, but it falls apart pretty quickly when you want to try to do a lot of coding. And we're going to be doing more coding there, and also in Anaconda Jupyter notebooks when we get into our machine learning part of these videos. So please like the video if it was useful for you, and I look forward to you being here again when we do another video on logic in Python. Thanks.